Hey everyone, I talk about Japanese games a bunch on this channel, but something I've not really discussed at any great length is Japanese-only games that I wish were released in the West. So for this video, I compiled a list of games I would love to see an English release for. Or German, that works too. Some of these I admit are unrealistic since they're not all for current systems, or are based off animes that aren't exactly mainstream, but I still think it'll be a fun thing to discuss. It's not a ranking, so the games aren't ordered in any specific way. Of course, if you know of any games I didn't mention that you'd like to see a Western release of, post them in the comments below. Also, just so you know, some of these games mentioned do have fan translations or guides, so it's possible to play some of these if you don't know Japanese. And you'll probably find that this list isn't your typical selection of games you might expect to see. I'm sure there's at least one or two you might have not heard of. Okay, let's get started. Valkyria Chronicles 3 for the PSP. Despite there being a fan translation of it, I still would have liked to see an official release outside of Japan, because that would have meant that the series would have sold better in the West. Valkyria Chronicles is a series of strategy RPGs that are based on World War II. It's an alternate reality situation, which turns out is a great way to touch on many subjects of the war in a different way or from a different perspective. The great thing about the gameplay is that there's real-time phases that make it feel very different to more traditional strategy RPGs. The first and fourth games are celebrated as being classics by a few enthusiastic fans, of which I count myself one of. The second game, while being very good, somehow lost several elements that made the series appealing. Some put it down to the school setting, others didn't appreciate the gameplay changes. Realistically, it's probably both things that hurt the game's overall popularity. Not to mention the fact that the series moved from the PS3 to the PSP. Valkyria Chronicles 3, on the other hand, while still being a PSP game, was seen as a step back in the right direction by the ones who've played it. Thankfully, a fan effort did result in an unofficial translation, but it is unfortunate that it's not an easily accessible game for some people. Dengeki Bunko Fighting Climax. You might be saying at this point, hey, that game has been released in English, and you're right, but a newer version of the game was released in Japan, which has the word ignition added to the end, signifying its superiority over the original version. Dengeki Bunko Fighting Climax is a crossover fighting game that features a lot of characters from animes that I have watched and enjoyed. Ignition includes a bunch of additions compared to the regular game, so for me it's kind of hard to go out and buy the regular version of it. Just knowing that Uhiharu and Kuroko are not in there is kind of disappointing. Genkai Toki series. Some of you may know what this series is, but it's more likely that you've heard the names of some of the individual games instead. Genkai Toki consists of, so far, 4 games. We got the first 2, which have been released in English, Monster Monpiece and Morero Chronicle. The 2 more recent entries, Morero Crystal and Genkai Toki 7 Pirates, have not made it out of Asia. Morero Crystal was released originally on the Vita, and then quite recently again on the Switch. It's based on the dungeon crawling gameplay of Morero Chronicle, but with a different story and new mechanics added in. The main focus is the monster girls, and yes, the rubbing feature remains. I think there's around 70 or 80 monster girls, with more than half of them being the ones from the previous game, and each girl has an ending. 7 Pirates is also a Vita and Switch game. Unlike its predecessor, it drops the dungeon crawler aspect, but retains the RPG part. The game is primarily 3D now, including the characters, at least when you're just running around in the game. The art style has become more cute, which for me makes the ecchi aspects more humorous in a way, but overall I don't know if I like the change. It's like they're a bit too chibi, though it does fit with the more lowly looking characters. I've never been a fan of the pirate aesthetic, so that's a thing, but I'm still interested because I like the previous games. Instead of the bump scratch mechanics of past games, 7 Pirates is more breast focused. There's, believe it or not, a chest growth system, where various pinch, poke, and grabbing motions affect chest size. Bigger boobs equals bigger defense and attack, while smaller equals more speed. It sounds and looks pretty hilarious. In the end, it did take a few years before we did get Morero Chronicles, so who knows, maybe we'll see them one day as well here in English, or in the West or whatever. Okay, so it looks like I actually missed a game in the series. It's Genkai Toki Castle Panzas. So I'm not really sure why there's a German word thrown in there, but okay. Then again, this is pretty normal for Japanese games. The gameplay seems to be an evolution of the pirate one, though we see the return of a more familiar art style, so it's not as chippy looking anymore. The battle system and also, the graphics look very much like a Neptunia game. But once you know who the publisher as well as the developers are, then that probably isn't much of a surprise. There's still the sort of mini games that are, like in the other games as well, but I do worry that they're kind of losing that charm they had with the 2D dungeon crawlers. But yeah, that's the game I missed. I'll overlay some footage there, and you can probably tell what it is supposed to be from that. Alright, back to the video. Senran Kagura New Link for iOS and Android. Normally, we do get Senran Kagura stuff in the West, though technically we didn't get the very first 3DS game. We did get Burst, which was an expanded version of the first game. Every game afterwards, all the spin-offs, the anime, and even the manga. Somehow, New Link isn't one of those things we got though. It's a mobile game for iOS and Android. Unlike other games in the series, it's a card battle game. It looks like it's more strategic because of that. If you know about this game, you might have found out about it in the same way I did. When browsing websites specialized in Japanese artwork, let's say, I kept stumbling upon these images of Senran Kagura, and they looked official. A quick look at the tags revealed that they were from the game Senran Kagura New Link. To my surprise, there were a bunch of characters I've never seen before, and I want to know who they are, and that's the reason why I want to play this game. The thing I don't understand about a lot of these Japanese mobile games is, why are they so reluctant to release English versions of them? The console and PC games are all translated and released here, so why not New Link? Mobile games are often quite good moneymakers, so to me it would make sense. I know that there are guides to show you what everything means, but I don't really like to play games that way. Plus, I'd like to be able to know what's going on and follow the story. Sora no Woto Maiden Quintet. Now, here's something I've never talked about on the channel before. Sora no Woto, or Sound of the Sky as it's called in Anglais, is a show that's very dear to me. If I had a list of my top 3 favorite anime, which I do, then Sora no Woto would be in it, and it is. Basically, I just like the show, and that's why I want the game. Some people like to simplify the concept of the show and say, hey, it's like if you combine K-On! And Valkyria Chronicles, because it has large, slice of life portions and also an alternate reality World War II setting. But I see it as quite a different thing. There's a gradual build-up in the story until it reaches a crescendo. That's a good word to use because of the music theme. The amount of detail in the show and story is incredibly vast. Back in the day, there was 4chan observation and speculation posts, which are great fun to look through. You can find them if you just Google the show. But beware of spoilers, which, that's a real thing. In fact, it's a very rewatchable show because there's so much that's easy to miss, because it's not an in-your-face type of show. Maiden Quintet is a visual novel that picks up where the show left off. Supposedly, the tone is more lighthearted. I just want to play it because that's the only part of the storyline I don't know about yet. Maybe there's little details that I can learn from the characters or the setting. Thankfully, there's a fan translation, so I can play it. I already have the patcher ready to go. I'm currently in the process of forgetting as much of the story as possible, so I can hopefully rewatch the show for the first time again, as much as that can be done anyway. Then I'll play the game afterwards. Other people are probably not that interested in the show or the visual novel, but hey, that's just how it is. After all, these are games I want to see in English, or else I would have called the video Japanese games other people probably would have liked to see in English. Yeah, that's a good title. But yeah, the reason I go on about it is because I feel there's just so much depth to the world and that setting. It feels like every avenue you might walk down, figuratively and metaphorically, has something at the end of it. But that's enough with my obsession over Sora no Woto. Let's talk about something else I'm obsessed with. Strike Witches games. Very clearly, there's an alternate reality World War II theme going on with me. If you don't know, Strike Witches, or the World Witches series, as it's also known, is a series where World War II aces are represented as girls, more precisely witches, who use their magic to power airplane legs called strikers. There's an excuse as to why they don't wear pants, but we all know the real reason here. The setting has been changed around so that aliens called Nuroi are the enemy, so the countries work together rather than fight each other. The inspiration of Strike Witches is a real-life, all-female Russian bomber regiment in World War II, nicknamed the Night Witches, or Nachthexen, as my fellow compatriots called them. I became really interested in the series after discovering one of the light novels called Somos Misfits Squadron. That's the original, not the recent remake that hasn't been translated yet. It has a very realistic feel. that in some ways doesn't align with the show now. Like there's details about the Nuroi that's different. But more importantly, it fills in various gaps in the setting that the show never touches on. In fact, the novels touch on all kinds of subjects like death, sexuality, and discrimination, and things like that in some way, even if it's just a little bit. To me, that made the entire series more enjoyable to me, since I feel like I have a better grasp of the setting. It's like you have knowledge of things that are off-screen. But I want to know more about the World Witches world. Plus, there's so many characters that don't appear in the show much, or at all, and I want to know more about them, which is why I want to play the games. The series has 4 Japan-only games that came out over the years, at least 4 is all I know of. There's Strike Witches, Blitz in the Sky for the Nintendo DS, which came out in November 26, 2009. I can't find much info on the game, but it appears to be a simulation game that features Junko as the, or at least a, main character. The only other thing I know about is that the game came with a fake pair of girls' gym shorts, which isn't exactly the most common type of pre-order bonus. May 27th, 2010 saw the release of a visual novel on the PS2. The game is called Strike Witches, What Can I Do Along With You? A Little Peaceful Days. Other than having a rather janky title, it also features 2 characters that only show up in the show once, Amakisuwa and Nishiki Nakajima, who appear in the last episode of Season 1 and Season 2, respectively. The plot is that the pair get stranded on a deserted island after an ambush. Since there is a distinct lack of screen time for both characters in the show, it would have been cool to follow the storyline in the game. I heard that people who played this VN praised this story in particular. Maybe I'm wrong and I mix it up with another Strike Witches game, but yeah, that's what I can remember. Strike Witches Silver Wing for the Xbox 360 and PSP is a game you might have heard of if you watch my videos, because I talked about it in the video about Japanese games on Xboxes. It's a bullet hell game which I'm not particularly drawn to normally, but it certainly fits the theme, doesn't it? It came out on July 29, 2010 for the Xbox 360 and June 28, 2012 for the PSP. So yes, somehow a Japanese market only game was an Xbox 360 exclusive for almost 2 years. The last Strike Witches game I know of is Strike Witches 2 Heal, Cure, and Squish for the Nintendo DS. It came out on October 10th, 2010. As you may have noticed, all the games came out within a 12-month period there. The title is quite funny and sketchy. There's a massage minigame, so I guess you could say it makes use of the DS's touchscreen quite well. The gameplay is described as featuring tactical shootouts between witches, whatever that means. I do hope that there's an actual story there rather than just a touchy-feely gimmick, but we may never find out since I can't really find anything about the game online. I think that's enough time spent on Strike Witches for now anyway. I do have a bit of a collection going on, so one day I might show you that. On the second channel, that is. Mainichi Compile Heart for Android and iOS. Somehow another mobile game crept onto this list. You may know this game under a different name. First, it was called Hyperdimension Neptunia the app, before being redesigned several years later into Neptunia and Friends. You can interact with the goddesses and do a few little activities here and there, as well as buy stuff like clothes. That's IRL money, just in case you're wondering. It is a mobile game after all. Both of the English releases were iOS only. Fine with me since I use both Android and Apple devices, but obviously not everyone does. So that's quite a restriction. You may notice that Mainichi Compile Heart doesn't mention Neptunia in the title at all. That's because in Japan, it's a Compile Heart themed game with characters from other Compile Heart games in it. Additionally, the JDM version of the game has more Neptunia characters. In comparison, the English version just feels incomplete. It would have been so much more fun with all the other characters, even just the missing Neptunia ones. So yeah, I see that as a missed opportunity. I can understand omitting the non-Nep characters so that the application can have Neptunia in the title, since that's by far well more known than the other ones in there. But why leave out some of the Neptunia characters? I don't really understand that. But yeah, I think that'll do it for now. As you saw, that wasn't exactly a typical selection of games for these sorts of lists. But that's why I thought it was kind of fun, since it's stuff you probably haven't heard of before. At least maybe 1 or 2 of them. There's more games I can think of, but for now, this is a decent amount. If you liked the video, please remember to give a like or subscribe. It might sound like a small gesture, but even just rating the video makes a big difference on YouTube. You can also become a Patreon supporter if you want to support the channel in a different way. Getting merchandise from the YSN Teespring store is another way to help out the channel. You can see that stuff underneath the video there. You can also check the links in the description, because everything's in there. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.